countries don't go bankrupt. They become insolvent and can't pay their debts. We predict that Canada will become insolvent within 5 years. The clock is ticking. Nobody knew this better than Paul Martin, who was finance minister in the Chrétien government and later became our 21st prime minister from 2003 to 2006. Over a few short years, he eliminated Canada's structural deficit and balanced the budget, initiating significant tax cuts and reducing our national debt. At the time, Canada had one of the highest budgetary deficits of all G7 countries. In 1992, Standard & Poor's lowered its rating on Canada's foreign-denominated government debt, which was followed 2 years later by Moody's reducing its rating. Martin made budget cuts that almost ground economic growth to a halt, scaling down government expenses to 1951 levels. During his tenure, he succeeded in eliminating a $42 billion deficit, achieving 5 consecutive budget surpluses, and significantly reducing Canada's debt-to-GDP ratio from 70% to roughly 50%. In December 2001, Martin was named a member of the World Economic Forum's Dream Cabinet. The global business and financial body listed Martin, along with United States Secretary of State Colin Powell and United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan, as top world leaders. While his record as finance minister was lauded in business and financial circles, there were undeniable costs. Martin erased debt through 20% departmental budget cuts, the privatization of Canadian National Railways, and the sale of Petro-Canada shares. This was most noticeable in healthcare, as major reductions in federal funding to the provinces meant significant cuts in service delivery. Paul Martin proved that reining in government spending was possible in Canada. Unfortunately, no one has had the temerity to do the same over the last 30 years, and our debt is now at a critical level of 110% of GDP. We've had some of the worst spendthrift prime ministers in the history of the country. Stephen Harper ran a series of budget deficits from 2008-09 to 2013-14, but returned to a balanced budget in 2015-16. At the time, the net debt to GDP ratio dropped from 36% in 2005 to 31% by the end of 2014. Justin Trudeau was a complete disaster and never balanced a budget over his 10 years in power. From 2018 to 2023, he recorded the 6 highest levels of spending on a per-person basis after adjusting for inflation in Canadian history, even after excluding emergency spending during the pandemic. He spent more per person during those 6 years than the federal government spent during the Great Depression, both world wars and the height of the global financial crisis. Today, we have another big spender. Mark Carney is projecting huge budget deficits that make Trudeau's deficits look modest. It takes real political courage to clean up government spending when no political party even recognizes there is a debt problem. We will need to make drastic cuts to federal and provincial budgets to avoid insolvency. The 20% cuts to departmental budgets made by Martin were a courageous act 30 years ago, but they will not be enough by a long shot to prevent economic collapse in this country. We will need huge cuts and even the elimination of whole departments. Governments across the country will have to shrink in size and get rid of costly and often useless programs. We will need to raise income taxes and the GST above 5%. During the Harper years, the GST was at 7%, so it would not be unusual to raise the sales tax. The 5% tax brings in a whopping $50 billion in revenue, so at 7% it would bring in $70 billion. But of course, we would first need to impose a debt brake on all federal and provincial governments. 0.35% of GDP would be a good start. If you are worried about debt and government overspending, check out our upcoming episodes. Insolvent in 5 is produced by Cinegraphica Media.